So what I'm finding here in terms of the effects of specific food groups, what we as human beings have classified as food groups, specifically the three macronutrient groups, that's carbohydrates, protein, and fats, which really and truly we could say, from my perspective, that is Moses, we have sources of glucose coming from carbohydrates from the digestive point of view, sources of amino acids coming from meats, and sources of fatty acids coming from meats, sources of fatty acids that comes from marine meats, and sources of fatty acids that come from plant sources, plants. The olive oil, the coconut oil, you have tahini, you have peanuts and other nuts that has fatty acids. Of course, what we would discover in the next few years is that a plant of a certain type may contain only X amount of fatty acids that is basically useful for the human body. And we could make our correlation with this based upon our discovery of amino acids. Few plants have what is considered to be a complete source of the 9 or 8 essential amino acids that the body needs for human beings to putting them out on a daily basis 2 or 3 times a day, 4 times a day. We do know that from scientific research. We do know that ruminant animals do provide the clear amount of essential amino acids plus some other types of amino acids. So we may sooner or later discover, we may discover fatty acids. For example, in nutmeg have myristic acid. Caprylic acid is one that comes to my mind. That's a fatty acid. ALA is another important one coming from the plants that would create for us in our bodies. If we could have processed it at 50 or 60%, we would have gotten enough, maybe EPA and DHA. But we do know that the human body does not process it properly. Not that it doesn't process it at all. There is a conversion, but very low conversion. So when we go through those critical aspects of our life, we do discover that fatty acids not being well studied may be in the same bracket, or I would say the same context as the amino acids. We may have just made a category to classify these things to make it easy for somebody to communicate, or maybe alternatively, we may have done the classification to ensure that we don't have the details to confuse those that have passed, but the details are quite required now. So we continue our lives saying that we have diabetics, we have diabetes, which is an indication that you have an excessive amount of glucose molecules circulating in the bloodstream, meaning that it's going up and down. It's always in the bloodstream, just going up and down. Whereas in a normal human being, when you have a high consumption of glucose that goes beyond the threshold of your normal amount, it goes into the bloodstream, and your muscle cells and other cells, other organs utilize these glucose molecules with or without the aid or help of insulin. They utilize these molecules, and so you don't get the same amount of glucose molecules going around into the circulatory system. So imagine everything is coming from the gut, it goes to the liver, and the liver has to just release everything because the liver by itself has to first of all stop glucose from going in by taking in some, but it cannot do that when we have a challenge, which is now discussed as the liver cells are not absorbing glucose molecules for whatever cause. Generally, the cause is around the liver itself being full. All the liver cells are being filled with fat. So the liver would then start to create new fat cells, but not so fast to absorb. And that's why we have, or hence we have, fatty liver disease. And this is caused generally by the over consumption of some molecules in the carbohydrate world that is called fructose. So the words we should have learned would have been glucose, which is the sugar to be utilized by the cell, fructose sugar, and that would have been enough. I know we could say monosaccharide, but for the regular common man like myself, we could have said sugar fructose, sugar glucose, and maybe sugar galactose, if that is the name, or lactose. And it is simply enough for us to have communicated this means and turn the conversation to a point to say when you have the sugar fructose, which of course is abundant in fruit, that's not a problem because when you eat the fruit on an empty stomach with its fiber, when you eat, not when you drink, when you eat fruits on an empty stomach with the fiber, it generally should go to the colon where those great colon bacteria would utilize the mining ability to mine the fiber, convert some of the fiber into some of the healthy fatty acids like butyrate and propionate and acinate or whatever else they make to give the colon some food and strengthen the colon cells. However, when we when we have overconsumption of the same fruits, we do have some of the molecules, or when we consume any fruits, we do have a few molecules of fructose sugar going to the liver. The liver has to handle the fructose sugar in a different way as compared to glucose. Notice earlier on we referred to glucose as the sugar that goes, and the liver could say to the glucose, go out, I'm busy. You go into the bloodstream, and the glucose molecules would go into the bloodstream. And if you are active and the muscle cells are pumped, they would then try to suck up some glucose with the help of insulin, sometimes without, based on how active you are. But the insulin then gets very much triggered to get some of the glucose to go into the cell. The insulin is not trying to get rid of the glucose from the blood, it's getting it where it has to go, assisting, if that is the role of the insulin. However, the insulin should have first try to tell the liver to take a certain amount of glucose. But as I said, the liver is fatty, and what causes the liver to become fatty? Fructose. Whether you took fermented fructose or you consume fructose in its regular form, they both have the same effect because they only could be metabolized or used or consumed by the liver cells. The liver has to stop and deal with them by itself. It cannot say, okay, let me just send fructose molecules to the muscle cells and somebody will deal with it. No, it has to deal with it by itself. So in learning this, we understand the importance of carbohydrates, at least say sugar, fructose, sugar, glucose. So for the diabetic, it is sugar, glucose that is high in the blood. It is not sugar, glucose that is causing the problem. It is sugar, glucose that is measured to see that whether you were supposed to have five whatever or four whatever, you are now having 25 and it's staying there for hours upon hours upon hours. That is what we consider to be a diabetic person. The levels of the sugar glucose is not being reduced over time. Even though the person may be active, it is not being reduced over time. And of course, when the liver gets its hands to deal with this excessive glucose in the blood, because it would have made rungs and rungs and rungs and not disappear, the liver itself may have to say, I need to assist in this glucose and save the soul, save the physical human being by grabbing out some of this glucose. I cannot store it into myself anymore because I am full with all my cells, all my containers are now filled already. So I would push it into other places in the body, around the belly, around the bottom, and that's where we see the the fat going and get deposit. But of course, the lesson for us in life here is sugar causes us to put on fat, or sugar really breeds fat. And when we say sugar, fructose sugar, glucose sugar, even galactose would convert to glucose. They would turn into fat if they are consumed in what is considered to be too much for you, not a measured quantity to say John is eating 6 grams of sugar. Too much for you is not too much for John. John may be a very physical person and consume his sugar during his time of activity, and so his muscles could utilize glucose sugar quickly. and easily, whereas Mary is sedated in her office and she might consume a amount, just a tip of glucose or a amount of a fruit, which might just put a little bit of fructose in her blood, in her liver, towards her liver, and that may be her threshold. That is not something that you could say John or Mary. That is why we are learning so many strategies now as to how to deal with trying to help the body to consume out the excessive amount of glucose when we do that. Of course, the best strategy to get rid of glucose in the excessive amount in the bloodstream when it goes to the circulatory system is to not put glucose in for the mouth. And hence we are looking at the word carbohydrates here to understand everything that is of plants, generally everything that is of a plant-based substance is a source of glucose. And if it is a fruit from a plant, it has both fructose and glucose combined. Therefore, when you think about cane sugar and you say, "Oh, that's sucrose," let's ignore that. It does not digest to sucrose or stay in the body and say it's sucrose and it gets out into your waste pipe. No, it digests or split apart, and you have the molecules of fructose and the molecules of glucose entering into your portal vein up to the liver. So hence why we consistently say reduce on your table sugar, yes, but what we are saying is reduce on your fructose molecules or reduce on your glucose molecules. These two sugars, glucose and fructose, are very abundant in plants. So let's look at the sugarcane. A wonderful product, you might say, because it's sweet and lovely and gives you that amount of energy when you are walking the land. And listen to this here. You are walking the land, you will cut a sugarcane and you will take your time and chew that sugarcane. Let's get it clear. There, I have not met any farmer who could chew his sugarcane so that he could make it into a cup of juice in an hour. No, a farmer would start chewing his sugarcane and his joints here would get the exercise, but he would have a joint of sugarcane, takes his cutlass and clean out the hard part of the back, the cellulose, and then he starts chewing and chewing and chewing. It also gives his teeth a nice little scrub. That is what you do with sugarcane. So you sit now and you consider your experience with the sugarcane and you say, when I suck a sugarcane, I am not loading myself with a ton of that molecule sugar called fructose, molecule sugar called glucose, and you are also getting it in liquid water form. Contrast that now when we do this to the sugar cane and we make it into a liquid juice. Of course, it is wonderful. No one could doubt how sweet sugars like fructose and glucose combined taste. We are not here to talk about the taste. It's wonderful. I could tell you that. In fact, my mouth is making that salivation right now, just thinking about a sugar cane juice. And maybe my pancreas might be making insulin, you never could tell. However, the reality strikes us here where we are now grinding the sugar cane, making it into a nice bottle of concentrated liquid fructose and liquid glucose. It goes into your acidic stomach, and here is where the point that carbohydrates do not stay in the acidic stomach. One, two, you would find on this article or on this website page that carbohydrates has a pull-down effect, simply meaning that when you consume carbohydrates, whether it's in the reform like cane sugar, orange juice, watermelon juice, or any fruit juice where you remove that substrate called the hard part, the part that would cause small quantities of the fructose and glucose sugar molecules to be absorbed into the small intestine villi walls up to the portal vein and into the liver. That once that fiber is removed, then you have a liquid format of the fructose molecule and the sugar glucose that rushes up maybe in the first part or the first 2 feet of the small intestine. It's liquid. So as soon as it leaves your mouth, the digestion already starts with amylase. It doesn't need anything in the stomach per se, because stomach is not for the digestion of carbohydrates, specifically those refined types. It rushes to the duodenum into the small intestine, and all of a sudden you have liquid fructose and glucose just sucking in because there is nothing to grab onto it to pull it down. There is no starch, no fiber, nothing to grab onto it to pull it forward. So what it's doing, it's just sucking in through like a sponge that was squeezed, and as soon as you dip it in water, it fulls up. That's what's happening with the liquid juices of what we call natural juices. There is nothing here that is natural in the point of view of saying, oh, it's just from a natural sugar. Fructose molecule, if it is a L, it doesn't matter if it came from a tree, or if it came from a lab, or if it came from somebody's saliva. If that is the fructose molecule, once you see the L, oh, you could always say that is the fructose molecule. It doesn't matter where it comes from. And so, if we get this as persons in the Caribbean very much clear with some sort of understanding, we would then move into understanding why it is so important and instructive in 2024 to get ourselves understanding that the plant juices, whether it is, and of course, I would say that celery, carrot, beet juice, which is a good mixture in a small shot glass, should not have too much of challenge. But this is, who am I speaking to? The healthy has a different load, as we say, and the healthy generally is more physically active. So they would take the glass, they might drink a big glass of beet, carrot, and celery juice, which might be more on the glucose side, and they would go out to work. The activity would consume the glucose, and whatever other antioxidants that they have to come with would be present. And so that person may not see an immediate challenge, but the person who's not so active and also who's not so well may have a number of challenges when it comes to consuming the same green juices, because we have to get to the reality. What comes out of the juice, it is not just H2O water, but there is a lot of glucose. And in some case, when it comes to fruits, when we make the fruits with the vegetables, we are putting in fructose to make it sweet. So when we do the beets, carrots, and we put an apple and a peach or a pear into that mix to juice it, and we remove the fiber because the juicer strains everything out, and we get this wonderful tasting substance that we call green juice. Nothing is wrong today, nothing is wrong tomorrow, nothing is gonna be wrong for the next 6 months, 7 months, maybe 8 months, 10 months. For the normal person, it may go up to years. Nothing would be wrong because the normal person is actualizing the eventual life outside, physically burning those molecules of glucose so quickly that they would not feel the effects or the terrible effects of an oversaturated bloodstream with glucose molecules, or the effects of fructose hitting the liver and oversaturating the liver. Of course, the liver could manifest and metabolize its content of fructose based on the amount. Because remember, fructose is alcohol and fructose is fruit juice, or what we call fruit juice in the raw sense. They are both the same when it comes to the liver. The liver could handle a certain quantity, but as you get older, as you move up in age, and as you become less active, you may realize you have to decrease on these things if you are so steep in these ways. However, what you need to understand is when you hit yourself with an issue such as the D word, diabetes, I wouldn't pronounce that word. When you hit yourself with these kind of issues where you have glucose floating around in the bloodstream over the amount of that you should have, and you measure yourself with your finger prick and you realize it's just glucose upon glucose loads, then you come to the point and start asking yourself, what am I doing wrong? And you start realizing you are eating rice, it has starch. You consistently eat this rice, you eat bread, flour based substances. It could be cassava flour, almond flour. Of course, almond flour has more fiber than any of them, and it has some fats. You have other things like chickpeas and so forth, quinoa and everything. Quinoa is good from a protein point of view if you know how to utilize it in your acidic stomach. But then at the end of the day, they are all carbohydrates because they are providing you with a certain content of glucose that is way as much as you put into 1 or 2 teaspoons of sugar in a cup of tea and drinking it. The only difference with that glucose from a plant in its raw state, for example, you eat a sweet potato, what you might say is The sweet potato having its fiber with it might not allow the glucose to rush across to the liver as compared to a cup of tea with a spoonful of sucrose or glucose mixed together, which is fructose and glucose, which we call table sugar. And that is what one of the things I think we have to come to grips with, that we have to find the alternatives to our nutritional molecules. There is no nutritional molecule that requires, or no document I have found that requires our nutritional molecule, specifically glucose. Fructose is not mentioned as a needed item in the bloodstream, meaning that from the gut, if you put fructose in your mouth, it is targeting the large intestine if it has to get it for fermentation, if you like to ferment things that way. And that's fine, because you would get, after the fermentation process, that's how you get your the bacteria, convert them into butyrate and other things. But we do not find any evidence of fructose in the bloodstream as being required. We are finding the evidence that glucose converts to fructose when you are dehydrated. You are creating one uric acid. When you are super dehydrated, fructose becomes a molecule created from glucose to actually force the liver to make or store fat, so that you would now become like a camel and hold water that you cannot get when you are dehydrated. And that is why we need to understand dehydration more and more as we go forward. Remember, dehydration is not just consuming water, but consuming the key minerals of potassium, sodium, and magnesium, calcium too, but whatever the key minerals to be, I yawn because it's getting cool, to be available in that which we call the H2O. And so, folks, I want to thank you because I want to go to bed now. I need to go to bed early today. I want to thank you for your insightful input into my article here, for visiting AI Health Insight, aihealthinsight.org, and finding the information there. The little research that is done has some references at the bottom of the paper that you see on screen here. I don't know why I cannot get a good video recording software that would really help me to do what I want to do properly. I can't scroll through this here, and this is not what I wanted. But this paper here should help you. This one help you to find some evidence and ask yourself the hard questions regarding what's really going on from a point of view of our lives. Stomach acidity being so much by the designer, something that is to be acidic by the design of nature, or whatever you believe in, the designer would have made the stomach a serious acidic state from a point of view of the liquids in the stomach, and the design of the stomach itself being of one that could store, the only place that could hold and store safely those acids, being in the region of maybe from 0 to 2.5 up to 3, 2.5, 0 to 0, very acidic. 2.5 should be the standard measure. Then should tone down as you drink water, and it should tone down as you eat more food, and it should tone down as you eat a lot of carbohydrates. You do see it tone down a bit. When you eat protein and you eat fats, then you start seeing a total different ABC altogether. You start realizing that the carbohydrates tones it down, as you are seeing here. But when it comes to the fats somehow brings about a greater production of acidity in the stomach, not just bring about a greater amount of acidity. For example, a protein-based substance, and let's get real, protein-based substance has to be meat, fish, eggs, legumes. I have it listed there because we consider these as protein. But the problem with legumes, you would never get the kick of stomach acidity from the stomach as with meat, because legumes is also a carbohydrate source. It has a lot of sugars, a lot of fructose, no, a lot of glucose, yes. And so once you have the presence of the glucose, which is indication of the carbohydrate, what happens? You would have this pull effect of carbohydrates, meaning the stomach wants to become acidic, but it's not getting the kick of the stimulus from the mouth. It was not that signal that you're sending to your brain to say, here comes something that is concentrated in fatty acids or fats and concentrated in amino acids of all sorts. So you better make a good showdown in that stomach. The brain doesn't get that signal from eating a plant-based substance because it is also of a glucose based substance or carbohydrates, which starts the digestion in the mouth. So the signal is all muzzled. Of course, one of the things we learn that we should try to do when we are eating carbohydrates is eat carbohydrates during the time of need for glucose, which is your active season, which generally falls for most people as the daytime, and for the evening into the night, early evening into the night, you consume that which is called your meat based substances, where you get your source of amino acids and fatty acids. And that's the funny thing, meat contains both your amino acids and your fatty acid substances when they get digested, and they both sit in the stomach for a while, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours, to be adequately acidified, and all the enzymatic function that knows what they have to do in an acidic environment like pepsin and the intrinsic factor, these are two, they wake up. GLP-1 also wake up, which is another hormone. They wake up and do their job pretty well when we put something like a piece of meat in its sense of what really is meat. However, when you put carbohydrate, it's more like an opposite effect upon the stomach acidity, because the carbohydrates want to leave, it wants to get to its destination of the small intestine. So these three macronutrients here, again, the paper would show you that the references are here for you to pay attention to, from where these semi conclusions are drawn. There's not full conclusions; they are semi conclusions. You find your own conclusions. You download this, find yourself reading through all these papers if you want to. I have a few of the papers here, so you would be able to find them on this website apart from just the links. I need to put them like this, and then I need to combine everything into one PDF so that you have reference material for yourself. So thank you for being with me here today. Again, wonderful to have you, and take care of yourself.